The porcelain plate slipped from Mira's hand, shattering on the floor. Before her stood a drenched, trembling man, too ashamed to raise his eyes. Mira placed herself between him and the restaurant owner's fury, her chest tightening not from fear, but from familiarity. She was all too used to people ignoring another's pain, too used to silence meted out to kindness. But on that day, she did not turn away. She offered him a bowl of soup. And in that moment, she unknowingly set in motion a ripple that would shake all of America. If you enjoyed this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is in your location. It's always thrilling to see viewers joining us from all around the world. Her name is Mira Dalton, 35 years old, living on the outskirts of Port Orchard where Puget Sound winds gust through old window frames, where the morning fog lingers until nearly noon, and where people's hearts often do the same. She does not stand out. She is not the sort of woman who makes heads turn twice. But anyone who's sat in the Ocean's Edge diner at dawn will recognize her, the woman with her hair tied back, shirt sleeves rumpled at the cuffs, and a moss-green apron frayed at the edges, as though every thread has absorbed the scent of coffee and half-forgotten stories. The diner sits right on the shoreline. Waves serve as a constant soundtrack, and the briny tang of salt creeps into every crack in the wooden tables. Mira is the first to unlock the door each morning, while it's still dark, and the last to flick off the lights each night, long after the street lamps have changed hues for the second time. She never complains. She never looks for praise. She never strikes up idle conversation. Yet every cup of coffee she pours is just the right measure. Every napkin she folds with exact command. No one knows how many times she's watched customers wipe away tears with a corner of their napkin. She lives in a small room above the laundromat, accompanied by an old Labrador named Scout-eyed and limping with age. Scout used to be a search and rescue dog. Now he's Mira's sole companion, the only one who waits for her to come home each night. On her room's wall hangs a faded photograph of her grandfather, Sergeant Roy Dalton, dressed in a paratrooper's uniform, taken in Normandy in 1944. On her desk sits a small wooden box containing his service dog tags, a worn handwritten letter, and a tarnished insignia. Her grandfather never spoke much about the war. But he once told her, "Honor doesn't need loud words. You only need to live so that others feel safe standing beside you." Mira has never forgotten. Port Orchard isn't brutal, but it isn't kind, either. Folks are busy, skeptical, and often weary. People like Mira quiet, diligentare, easily overlooked. Yet that is exactly how she survives. No one ever asks why she works double shifts. No one knows how many times she's refused offers to leave town. She simply wipes down the counter, fills out order slips, refills the salt cellar, and remembers the faces of everyone whose hand trembled as they lifted a spoon. She remembers the man who sat by the hearth every Sunday afternoon after losing his wife. He'd order only a cup of tea. Mira would set a buttered roll beside it, saying nothing. She remembers the boy with the bruise on his arm, his mouth curved in a smile while his gaze stayed downcast. She let him choose his own meal and would slip him an extra cookie now and then. Not out of pity, because she, too, was once a child like that. Mira is neither wealthy nor famous. But in that threadbare apron, she carries the legacy of a generation that knows loss. And she believes that if you listen long enough, you can hear all the things others choose to ignore. No one knows exactly what Mira thinks each morning when she gazes out at the sea where sky and water meet in a hazy horizon. But perhaps, like her grandfather, she is simply waiting for something. Not a miracle, but a reason to keep believing that kindness can still exist, even in the coldest places. Then, One rainy December night, that reason walked into the Dinerno announcement. No invitation, just asking for a cup of hot water and a scrap of bread. No one knew what would happen next. But Mira knew just by looking into his eyes that he was no ordinary homeless man. He was a soul clinging to the last shred of his dignity. Rain poured down like buckets, each drop striking the tin roof of the Ocean's Edge diner in a steady, mournful rhythm. Each ping sounded like a gentle knock on the quiet spaces Mira had grown used to keeping in her heart. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks of the windows, bringing with it the chill of the sea and something else smoldering a warning of the unknown. The clock on the wall crept to 8:47 p.m. Only a few straggling patrons remained, heads bent over coffee mugs or self-finesse shadows hiding from the world. Mira was wiping the last grease stains from the counter when the doorbell chimed softly, a faint sound, yet enough to startle her. The doorway cracked open. A gust of wind rushed in. And then he stepped inside. He was a gaunt figure, stooped, rain dripping from the tattered hem of his coat. The military green jacket was worn through on one side to the lining. His old baseball cap hung sodden, and an uneven beard obscured much of his face, yet Mira still caught his eyes, not the eyes of someone starving, but of a person begging to be seen. He gripped a small paper bag as if he let go it, everything he had left in the world would vanish. He didn't look around or ask for a table. He simply stood there between the diner and the downpour, between two worlds. Mira stepped out from behind the counter without a word or a startled glance. She approached him softly, as though not wanting to break something fragile. "You need something warm, right?" she asked in a voice as gentle as smoke. The man did not reply at once. His throat worked as if swallowing sand. Finally, he managed, just loud enough for her to hear, "Just hot water, and any stale bread you might have to throw away." Without another word, Mira turned away. Behind the counter, she ladled the remaining soupa, hot stew of vegetables and beef into a bowl. She sliced 2 buttered bread pieces and poured a fresh cup of black coffee. She arranged them all on a tray and tucked in a neatly folded napkin. She carried the tray to the table beside the stove, setting it down as though it were simply an extra order, utterly ordinary. The man shuffled over and sat down. When he looked up at her, his eyes glistened not just from the rain, but from something older, deeper. "My wife used to say," he offered with a faint smile, his voice like wind slipping through a narrow door, "the coldest people deserve the most warmth." Mira did not reply. She simply nodded once, then turned away, her hands still tingling from the warmth of the tray she'd placed down. She did not need to ask his name. She already knew someone like him did not come to a diner merely for a meal. He came to remind others that kindness is a fire. And sometimes a single spoonful of soup can rekindle the part of a person long since chilled. The diner was not busy, yet it felt quieter still. A couple by the window sipped coffee in silence, never looking up. A middle-aged man folded his newspaper, adjusted his glasses, and bowed his head as if he'd seen nothing at all. The hush was heavier than the rain. Mira turned back toward the kitchen. She took her time. Each step was a promise to herself. That kindness, however small, requires no permission. On the tray, the soup steamed and sighed. The man Jonas Briggs, as Mira learned, laterate slowly, as if each bite were a ritual. He cradled his spoon with both hands, handling it as though it bore precious cargo. No hurried scooping, no ravenous gluttony, just silent gratitude, quiet as someone who'd lost everything yet still cherished each hot spoonful. When he'd nearly finished, Mira placed a fresh pot of coffee on the counter nearby. She said nothing, offered no gesture, but he noticed. And when he looked back, he murmured so softly she nearly missed it, as if afraid to break the fragile moment. "Thank you for seeing me." Mira stood still for a few heartbeats, then turned and walked away. She did not need to look back. Not because she was unfeeling, but because she understood that some things require no reply. They exist wholly in the act itself. Outside, the rain continued to drum the shoreline. But in that corner of the little diner, something had begun to thaw. Not snow, not the weather, but a thin crust of ice long coating the heart of a man and a town. The kitchen door slammed open with such force that the spice rack trembled. Mira hadn't yet turned when the familiar voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. "I told you no feeding beggars." Kent Hollowayth Diner's owner, massive of build, his apron slung over one shoulder like a badge of authority, strode up to her. His face was flushed, whether from anger or from a wounded pride he couldn't name. "You make me look weak in front of customers. This is a diner, not a charity kitchen." Mira didn't reply. She stood tall, the cloth still in her hand, her gaze unflinching. In that instant, amid the steam rising from the leftover soup and the startled eyes of a few patrons, the room seemed to freeze. Kent ground his teeth and hissed more harshly, "You're fired. Right now." His words rang out clearly, needing no repetition. But what chilled Mira most wasn't his verdict, it was the silence around her. A full diner, yet nobody rose to her defense. No one said she was in the right. No one asked why kindness was being punished. A man by the window sipped his coffee. A young woman scrolled on her phone. A couple exchanged a glance and then pretended not to notice. Avoiding eyes, feigned busyness as if Mira and the trembling man in the corner had never even existed. She removed her apron, folded it neatly, and laid it on the counter. Her hand trembled ever so slightly, but her spine remained rigid. Just as her grandfather had taught her, never let anyone steal your dignity even if they take your job. Mira stepped out into the night rain, her canvas shoes soaked through. Scout waited for her under the laundromat awning, his tail tapping softly on the concrete. She knelt down, wrapped him in an embrace, and exhaled not from weakness, but from knowing once more she would have to begin again from scratch. Back in her small room above the laundry, Mira hung her coat, slipped off her damp shoes, and lit a candle. The pale glow wasn't enough to warm the air, but it was enough for Scout to burrow into her lap, his steady breathing a gentle answer amid the storm. She stroked his head, her eyes drifting to her grandfather's photograph. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice steady, "I'm okay." She did not yet know that, in the corner behind the cash register, a teenager had secretly filmed the entire scene. Unaware that the under 1-minute video was circulating online, beginning with the image of a woman placing a bowl of soup on a table, and ending with her leaving the diner under the cold rain. The caption below read, "A waitress fired for feeding a homeless veteran." At first, views trickled in slowly. Then comments began to pour in, not words of sympathy, but cold jabs. "Rules are rules. This isn't the first time she's done this. That food was meant for paying customers. She's stealing." Mira didn't read those messages. She only felt their fallout. Old coworkers vanished from her contacts. A few people blocked her on social media. One former shift partner texted tersely, "Nice hero move, lady." The next day, Mira printed 3 copies of her resume. She walked to every diner in town known would hire her. At one place, the manager glanced at her name and resume, then shook his head. "Sorry, we don't want the drama." At another, the hostess wouldn't let her finish speaking her application, was handed back without explanation. That evening, Mira sat on a bench in the park by the bay, Scout curled at her feet. The wind blew cold. The sun set faster than usual. She closed her eyes, her heart hollow not from disappointment, but from exhaustion. Exhaustion at trying to explain to a world that has forgotten what simple kindness looks like. Yet even then, Mira had no regrets. She would choose that bowl of soup again. She would do it all over if necessary. Because some things once you know they're right can never be taken away, even if everything else is lost. If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, and stay tuned for the next unexpected twist. Comment 1 if you're still with us. It was still before dawn. The sky in the east had only a faint gray slash, like a cut through the thick fabric of night. The wind still carried the chill scent of sea spray and salt dust in its mist. Mira sat on the threshold of her small rental room, brush in hand, gently combing the silver fur of Scout. The old dog lay still, eyes half closed, ears flicking with each familiar stroke. It was a peaceful ritual between two weary soul sand, one of the rare moments not torn apart by uncertainty. From afar came the growl of engines. At first, a single rumble, then multiplied in unison, like a low orchestral chord. Mira paused mid-stroke. She looked up, her gaze drawn to the main road along the shore. Dozens then 100 soft black SUVs rolled into town. They parked in neat rows along the curb across from Ocean's Edge Diner. Doors opened almost simultaneously. Figures in sandy-colored uniforms, alighted badges gleaming on their chests, backs perfectly straight, footsteps silent as undertows. They said nothing. They formed ranks row upon row in disciplined silence. A gust lifted the hem of a coat to reveal the insignia of one of the world's most elite forces. Navy SEALs. From multiple units, yet today all stood under the same sky for one purpose. At their fore strode a man, his pace deliberate and firm as though each step was a remembrance. His uniform was uncreased, medals lined his left breast like the indelible marks of years past. On his lapel, a nameplate read, Pierce Briggs, Colonel, SEAL Team 6. He halted at the diner's entrance. On the street, a few people cracked open windows, others paused mid-crossing, murmurs rippled, but the formation did not budge. Pierce knocked on the door once, twice, thrice each rap confident. No haste, no demand, merely a proper summons. The door swung open. Kent Holloway appeared, still wearing his apron, face bleary from a coffee yet to be sipped. But at the sight of the silent ranks outside, and when his eyes fell upon the colonel's uniform, his drowsiness vanished faster than steam off the grill. "You are the owner of this diner?" Pierce asked, his voice deep, each word landing like a stone on a lake's surface. Kent nodded, speechless. "Then you need to hear this." Silence fell. A gull swooped low, the sound of its wings brushing the wind like a soft sigh. Then the colonel continued, slowly, "The man you called a vagrant is my brother." A hush exploded in the minds of everyone listening. Kent took half a step back, his lips quivering. Jonas Briggs was a staff sergeant leading a Black Ops mission in Somalia. He carried 14 men through a firefight zone. Not a single one of our soldiers died that day, but he never came home. Pierce paused, his gaze drifting beyond Kent to where mist still clung to the night air. We thought we had lost him. In the official report, he was classified as missing. To his family, he was an unnamed grief. But just yesterday, a waitress saw him. Not with pity, but with respect, not with cheap compassion, but with a hot bowl of soup. Mira stood off to the side of the street, hidden beneath the diner's awning. She heard each word clearly, one hand pressed to her chest, as if to steady the pounding within. "You need not explain," the colonel said, turning back to Kent. We are not here to seek justice because she, the only one not in uniform, has already done so. The entire street was silent. A single leaf drifted to the curb. A boy by his bicycle looked up, eyes wide. Pierce Briggs reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a small box. He held it aloft. Inside lay a worn dog tag on a frayed chain and a tarnished silver clasp. This star Jonas wore it over his heart, but he said it was not as worthy as the kindness shown to him by a stranger. At that moment, Mira stepped forward into view, no longer hiding. She stood tall, Scout at her side. She needn't have known what to duel that mattered was. She was already doing it. 200 seals in perfect unison raised their hands in salute. No cheers. No fanfare. Only the wind and the hearts of the town Spiopla rose with them that dawn in a town that had long forgotten how to see each other in true light. Mira said nothing. When Colonel Pierce Briggs gently placed his hand on her shoulder and invited her to step into the center of the formation, she only nodded and walked forward. There were no tears, no excuses, and no triumph. In the dim pre-dawn light, hundreds of seals saluted her not for who she was, but for what she had done when no one was watching. Her footsteps on the damp asphalt sounded like a simple, solemn chord. Mira passed among them without pride or hesitation, just a woman in a thin jacket, with a heart that had never abandoned what was right. Ocean's Edge Diner closed within 3 days. No announcements, no farewells. Just the neon sign going dark, and supplier orders canceled without explanation. Staff resigned. A few quietly left their keys in white envelopes on the counter. Kent Holloway disappeared from town as though he had never existed. No one looked for him. No one mentioned his name. Mira did not celebrate. She didn't appear on television news. She didn't post a word online. She did not need the world to know her name only, a place where she could continue doing what was right, this time with genuine support. On Thursday, wounded warriors reached out. They made no grand promises. They simply asked, "Would you like to run a soup kitchen? We have the space, the food supplies, the people who need help. We think you're the right person." Mira agreed without hesitation, not for fame but because at last she could do kindness without fear of being fired. The new kitchen was modest. An old vending machine warehouse. The floor still bore oil stains. The ceiling leaked in spots, but the light inside was genuine. And from day one, everyone who came knew, no paperwork, no questions, no judgments, just hot soup, black coffee, and a silent welcome. Mira no longer wore her faded green apron, but she still poured coffee with her left hand, wiped tables with her right, and remembered every name whether someone came once or dozens of times. She remembered the old man who sat silently for hours by the window. She remembered the mother cradling her child, eating each bite of bread slowly. And she remembered the young veterans, wearing hoodies instead of uniforms, coming only to sit across from Jonas Briggs and listen. Jonas now was clean-shaven, in a simple shirt. His old wound still caused him to limp, but his spirit was different. The VA had placed him in a rehabilitation center with a small garden and nurses who knew when to leave him in peace. Jonas did not speak much. Instead, he wrote handwritten letters, little notes. He recounted nights in Mogadishu, the crack of rifles in the jungle, and the terrified eyes of soldiers who nonetheless marched forward. He did not embellish. He did not portray himself as a hero. He simply told his story as if being remembered was its own salvation, and people came to hear. Not to idolize, but to understand. Younger soldiers' veterans still bearing fresh scars sat silently across from him, nursing plastic cups of coffee, absorbing each word as if they were paving stones leading them back to themselves. Mira sometimes sat apart, never intruding. She watched Jonas, watched his eyes as he spoke, and she knew he had reclaimed a part of himself he once thought lost. Not through doctors, not through medicine, but through something simple, someone seeing him, calling him by name, offering him a bowl of soup without condition. Once, Jonas came to the kitchen and sat at the far table. When Mira approached with a fresh cup of coffee, he looked up, his eyes bright. "I thought I was dead," he said, not with sorrow but with quiet acceptance, "until you set your hand on the table and didn't ask who I was." Mira said nothing. She placed her hand over her heart right where her pulse still beat evenly, just as those SEALs had saluted her that morning. And in that moment, there were no cameras, no audience, just the full presence of two people who had refused to let the world define them by their losses. In a town that once turned its back, there now stood a place with lights always on, cauldrons always warm, and hearts mended not by promises, but by small, steady acts as vital as each breath. Mira had never needed a stage, for in her soul she knew that the best deeds are done in silence, like honor, like compassion, like a bowl of soup offered without being asked. One gentle morning, as the leaves were just beginning to take on a deep golden hue, Mira was inventorying food in the kitchen when the front door creaked open. The sound was so soft it barely registered, but Scout, in the corner, lifted his head. He gave a quiet bark, as if to signal that something unusual, but not dangerous, was happening. Mira looked up. In the pale light stood a boy of about 7 or 8. His sandy hair, slightly oversized sneakers, and eyes brighter than anything else in the room caught her attention. In his right hand he held a cookie, carefully wrapped in wax paper and tied with a string. His left hand clutched a dollar bill, folded into thirds. He walked to the long table where Mira was arranging loaves of bread. His steps were sure, without hesitation, as if he had practiced this route dozens of times in his mind. "I saw you in the video," he said in a small, steady voice. "My grandpa used to serve people. He told stories about helping others, so I wanted to help someone like he did." He placed the cookie and the dollar bill on the table. Mira studied the boy without speaking. There was something in the way he stood, his shoulders a bit hunched, his gaze steady but hands trembling, that reminded her of Jonas and her grandfather, and all the people who had passed through her life with quiet courage. She knelt down to his level, her eyes fixed on his honest gaze. One hand she placed gently on his knee, the other over her own heart. "Would you like to use this money to help someone else?" he asked, hopeful. Mira remained silent for a long moment. She didn't need words. In that instant, they would have been superfluous. She simply nodded, her eyes glistening. Across the room, Scout barked again softly, just enough to stir the air, like a silent full stop at the end of a beautiful story. The boy smiled, then turned and walked out of the kitchen as quietly and resolutely as he had entered, leaving behind a shaft of light. Mira stood there a while, her hands still over her heart. A breeze blew in from the back door, carrying the scent of baking bread, old paper, and something deeper, perhaps memory, perhaps hope. In her small office, a simple room tucked behind the kitchen, Mira kept a few items not for their value, but for their meaning. On the wall hung a framed photograph, her grandfather, Sergeant Roy Dalton, standing beside an old Jeep, his smile just a half smirk, his gaze stern but not cold. Below it, a handwritten note tacked on, "Live so that others feel warm when they stand beside you." On a shelf lay his worn military dog tag, the chain frayed. Beside it sat a white ceramic bowl, the very bowl Mira had placed before Jonas Briggs that fateful, rain-lashed night. She had never washed it, not for laziness, but because that bowl, with its steam then, had carried a soul back from the brink of oblivion. On her desk lay a meticulously folded navy flag. The deep blue fabric and bright white star remained sharp. Accompanying it was a simple printed card. Awarded to Mira Dalton, who reminds us that honor lives in acts unobserved. She doesn't hang up certificates. She doesn't frame the newspaper articles. She doesn't keep clippings of news reports. Yet those objects, the bowl, the dog tag, the flagare markers reminding her that what she does isn't a one-off highlight, but part of an ongoing flow. The soup kitchen grows busier by the day. The homeless, the elderly, single mothers, veterans, penniless students, they all come without explaining or hiding anything. Each person has a story. Each table holds a corner of someone's memory. But through it all stands Mira-like, an unspoken pillar. She is neither loftier nor more brilliant than anyone else. But she is indispensable. She still arrives early and leaves late. She still tastes the broth herself. She still mops the floor after everyone leaves. And she still remembers every name, every face, every voice. Some evenings, after the kitchen is closed, Mira sits alone while Scout rests his head on her lap. She closes her eyes, lets the night breeze drift through the curtains, and whispers something to her grandfather, not a complaint, nor a claim of credit, but simply a way to keep him close. Honor is not something you prove. It is what you do when no one is watching. It is what you repeat again and again until the world begins to believe once more. And Mira knows that in that world where the quiet ones are often forgotten, there are still boys bringing cookies and $1. There are still eyes longing to witness kindness. And there is still a kitchen with room at every table and someone waiting. That is how the world is healed, not by miracles, but by the steady persistence of compassion, one small act at a time. Perhaps, in a world growing ever louder and colder, what we need is not more shouts, but more bowls of quiet soup. Mira Dalton's story reminds us that kindness needs no certification, and honor needs no spotlight. All it takes is one person, in the right place, doing what is right, even if no one sees. You may not run a soup kitchen or wear a uniform, but each of us has a ceramic bowl to give. Whether it's a small action, a look of understanding, or simply listening. If this story made you pause, reflect, or recognize yourself in it, please leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs a reason to believe in kindness. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit like, subscribe, and join us, because sometimes the greatest heroes don't need a camera.